Today, Jacob is going to talk about social media and polarization. In the ongoing process of the digital revolutions, the traditional media is replaced by internet media and social media shapes our minds and our behavior and creates new challenges like polarization, social dilemma. That's why I think today's topic is very interesting and relevant, and especially for Georgian audience, as the number of Facebook users is unprecedentedly high in Georgia. We're having more than 3 million active accounts. So please feel free to send us your questions during presentation time, and after the presentation, the speaker will answer your questions. And now, Jacob, please, the floor is yours and good luck.
Thank you, Guanza. I appreciate the introduction. And let me share my screen here. All right, I think it's sharing now. And once again, thank you. It's good to be here today and to be a part of New Vision's Democracy Talks. I've been teaching at New Vision for about, I believe, 2.5 years now. It's been a good experience and I appreciate the opportunity. So today we're talking about social media and polarization. We have about 15 minutes to talk about this. Of course, I'm sure that there's a lot more that can be said, but it'll at least kind of bring up some issues and things to discuss and think about more deeply. So it's hard, I think, not to notice polarization these days. Even a topic seemingly as innocuous as vaccines is divisive. I've had conversations with family members and friends recently, and I'm sure you have too. And it's just become clear that we hold widely different views on COVID-19 and vaccinations. The surprising thing is that we share many of the same convictions and worldview in other respects. You know, me and my friends and family, we're not that different. And yet some of my family members and friends, and perhaps some of you as well, are deeply suspicious of or even outright opposed to the vaccines that are becoming increasingly available. And then on the other side of the spectrum, there are those who tout the vaccines as an accomplishment of modern science and view all those who oppose them as ignorant. So we have kind of two widely opposing views. Why is this? And why do deep disagreements about this and other topics seem to be the rule of the day rather than the exception? The problem is not a lack of information. And the problem, in fact, may be the opposite. The internet and social media have leveled the information playing field to such an extent that everyone can contribute an opinion about anything, whether they're qualified to or not. And people are taking advantage of new pathways to give and receive information. Ribeiro and colleagues state across the globe, individuals are skeptical of traditional media vehicles and growingly consume news and opinion content on social media. As Guanza mentioned, 3 million users in Georgia. That is an incredibly high percentage of the population. The invention of the printing press 500 years ago democratized knowledge in much the same way that the internet and social media are today. Before the printing press, books had been slow and expensive to produce, so they were generally kept in churches, monasteries, and universities for the use of the few who were fortunate enough to read them. Now, I have nothing against churches or monasteries or universities. I go to church and I work at a university, but the printing press allowed knowledge to slip through the fingers of the educated elite and reach the masses in unprecedented ways. After Gutenberg's invention, any literate person could produce a pamphlet or a book cheaply and quickly spreading their views. And we are facing a similar situation today. We have greater access to information than ever before. And this could be a good thing, as Santos and colleagues point out. In principle, people can and individuals can use social media to access ideologically diverse viewpoints and make better informed decisions. Unfortunately, this is not always the way it actually happens. Now, you can see the social media social dilemma on the screen there. Some of you may have seen the documentary titled Social Dilemma. The film points out how social media have unintentionally led to greater polarization rather than community. Now, the creators of Facebook, Twitter, and the like, and other social media platforms did not expect or intend their sites to be areas for cyberbullying or pathways for fake news. I don't think they set out to do that. Presumably, they just wanted to give people more ways to communicate respectfully with one another, and that's a valuable goal. For instance, according to Facebook's website, their mission is to give people the power to build community and bring the world closer together. It is true that users form communities via social media and stay in touch with family, friends, and colleagues across the globe. Unfortunately, social media may simultaneously be contributing to the disintegration of community. One reason is the so-called attention extraction economy. You may have heard of the term, I'm not sure. It means that websites and apps generate income by capturing and keeping our attention. The longer that you and I look at the page, the more likely it is that we will notice and be persuaded by the advertisements. All websites, not all websites, many websites have advertisements. Facebook, of course, does, social media does. And as a result, algorithms, the programs that run these sites, tend to feed us more stories and more videos about what we like. Thus, if I watch one video about how vaccines cause blood clots, YouTube is likely to suggest other videos that cast doubt on the safety of vaccines. Now, this can lead in dangerous directions. A 2019 study found that a significant amount of commenting users systematically migrates from commenting exclusively on milder content to commenting on more extreme content. We argue that this finding provides significant evidence that there has been and there continues to be user radicalization on YouTube. People move from mild content to more extreme content based on what they're fed by these algorithms. In other words, social media consumption can be a slippery slope. The Social Dilemma website cites a 2018 internal Facebook report explaining that 64% of the people who joined extremist groups on Facebook did so because the algorithms steered them there. As Kathy O'Neill points out, algorithms are not neutral or unbiased. On the contrary, an algorithm has a built-in definition of success. It is an opinion embedded in math. Now, for the she explains that underneath these algorithms, there is a set of values. Now, for the corporations developing social media algorithms, success means more revenue, not more community, despite the feel-good mission statements. Unfortunately, users do not see or notice these value-laden algorithms when they follow suggested links to more videos, news, or Facebook groups. Now, user radicalization may not be an intentional result of social media algorithms, but it is a concerning byproduct of their Herculean efforts to keep us glued to the screen. Presenting us with information that challenges or contradicts our views would be counterproductive because that could encourage us to close the site or the app. So if we see something we don't like, we might close the website, we might close the app, and then the company would lose advertising money. Thus, we are continuously given content that, listen, tends to reinforce our opinions. Unfortunately, this reinforcement leads, now perhaps unintentionally on the part of social media, but it leads to less community. Or it would be more precise to say that it leads to a fractured society of micro-communities, or what are called echo chambers. Echo chambers are little communities, each with their own version of the truth, built on a steady diet of news that never challenges its perception of reality. Little communities that only talk to each other and not very often to the wider world. Now, to mention another film, the recent animated film Ron's Gone Wrong illustrates how technology intended to promote friendship actually does the opposite. I'm not sure if you've seen the movie, but I'll give a little bit of background. In the movie, a Silicon Valley style tech giant creates a Bee-bot. This is an internet connected robot with amazing artificial intelligence that helps children find friends, watch videos, post content. Clearly, it's just a stand-in for a smartphone and social media. But instead of creating more friendship, these Bee-bots and their algorithm actually divides the playground. It divides the children's lives into these isolated special interest groups. So kids end up competing for online followers. And of course, there's cyberbullying and lots of social comparison, just like what happens on social media. Now, I don't know if you've seen the movie, but to let you know at the end, the film stops short of offering any radical solutions to our technology-saturated situation. No one suggests getting rid of Bee-bots or limiting screen time or cutting them out entirely. The film's main answer, as much as there is one, seems to be, wait for it, developing a better algorithm. I know I was disappointed too. It was kind of a letdown. So the solution is better technology. But the interesting thing is that, according to the movie, the new and improved algorithm that these Bee-bots get more closely mimics human beings. So the Bee-bots, with their better artificial intelligence, they're quirky. Though they're helpful for the children, they don't obey the children's every whim. Instead, sometimes these robots are stubborn, sometimes they're opinionated, very much like real people, like you and I. And this makes me wonder, why are the Bee-bots or the technology needed in the first place? Why not just befriend a real person? Now, I doubt that human-like AI will solve the problems that social media have created, developing a better algorithm, quote unquote. But I think the film does correctly highlight a major difference between offline and online worlds. With social media, we can consume content that we like and avoid people or situations that make us uncomfortable. You just close it if you don't like it or click on something else. Now, Sinelli and colleagues conclude that online users online tend to prefer information adhering to their worldviews, ignore dissenting information, and form polarized groups around shared narratives. The fact is that humans offline tend to do the same thing, that we are inclined to seek out like-minded friends and avoid discomfort. But the messiness of offline life forces us to interact personally on the street or at a school or at a university or wherever we work with people that are different from us, with people that we disagree with. And interacting with real people in the real world is complex. There are social cues to figure out, and we can't mute people or scroll to the next video if we don't like what they're saying. But seeing and hearing a real person, rather than simply reading a status update or a tweet, humanizes our communication. So one thing about the online world is there is this anonymity, and it's easier to be aggressive. Anonymity contributes to aggression. But in the offline world, there's less room to hide. And we are more easily held accountable for our words and actions. And therefore, we tend to treat one another with more respect. Now, despite the challenges associated with relating to other humans, it's imperative that we do not give up on one another. Social media have led people toward the extremes. So, like I mentioned, these echo chambers, and we tend to move to the far right or the far left because social media tends to feed us what we want to hear, and it tends to move us further and further toward the poles, away from the middle. And there are fewer and fewer moderates. The large moderate middle that was once such a stabilizing force in society is shrinking. But going back to democracy and the topic of our series here, democracy needs a healthy, moderate middle in order to be successful. So to preserve and promote democracy, we must be careful not to misuse social media. We need to recognize that social media is actually pushing us away from one another and into these smaller communities. So I think a big question that many people are asking, of course, is what do we do from here? Well, there are no easy solutions. We're gathering online right now, and much of our lives happen online. Now, a common suggestion is to expose yourself to diverse opinions. And I agree, that's not a bad idea. I think we do need to be exposed to diverse opinions, and we need to intentionally listen to other sides. But the interesting thing is that research so far has shown that exposure to contrary data does not always reduce polarization, and sometimes it can even exacerbate it, meaning that sometimes when someone is in an echo chamber and they hear information that's different than their worldview, they tend to immediately reject it, and it reinforces what they already believe. So just hearing diverse opinions is not like a silver bullet. It's not a fail-safe way to solve our problems, although I do think it's a good idea. Interestingly, a better way forward, going back to the B-bots and humanized robots and all that, a better way forward might be to focus on exposure to diverse people rather than diverse data. Now, Santos and colleagues argue that the link recommendation systems, like on Facebook, you have like people you may know, those kinds of link recommendation systems. Those algorithms are wired to connect people of similar convictions, so people that are like you. But these researchers found that linking people who disagree actually leads people away from echo chambers and back toward that moderate middle. And I think strengthens our opportunity to have a healthy democracy. And honestly, this more closely resembles relationship building in real life. We talk to new people, and that moderates our opinions. It's sometimes tones down the rough edges that we have. Secondly, and finally, we need to recognize the value-laden nature of the algorithms that are underlying social media. I know that not all of us are math people. I'm not necessarily a math person either, and we don't need to understand all of the mathematics or technology behind algorithms, but we do need to understand that this is not just mathematics, these are values. As the Social Dilemma website points out, algorithms reflect an instance of logic programmed by a human. Logic that frequently reflects the individual bias or the interests of the company they represent. Just because it's a computer program does not mean that there's no bias. It was created by a human being with a purpose in mind, and we need to be aware of those purposes. Very, very aware. So the advice to think before you click, it holds true here. Just because it's a recommendation from YouTube or from Twitter or from Facebook doesn't mean you have to click or should click. Behind that recommended link is an algorithm. And behind that algorithm is a human being whose goals and priorities might be quite different from yours. Now think about the content that you are being fed. Is it promoting mutual respect, community, and a love for the truth? Or is it fracturing community and promoting polarization? Leading back to the question of how is our social media use promoting democracy in our society? And I'll wrap it up here and let you guys ask some questions if you would like. And I think it's now time for questions if there's anybody that has posted one or would like to respond in some way. And thank you for your attention. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jacob. And I'm opening up the discussion with the first question, actually. We all live in post-truth societies and we're trapped in our social bubbles, and it's very comfortable to live in social bubbles, and how to come out from our social comfortable bubbles.
Yeah, I think that's the big question. And like I said, I think meeting real people offline is very helpful, and limiting our time that we are using our apps and our social media. I think one thing that we all have to be careful about is when we are around other people, it's still easy to be using our phones and inside of a social bubble, even when we are physically present with others. So I would encourage better, more disciplined use of phones in the sense of, when you're around other people, try to put it away so that you're talking to real people face to face. I think that would be a great start. Does that get at your question a bit? Okay, good.
Unfortunately, we cannot ask the senders. Okay, the next one. What about kids' safety online? What's your opinion about this? Because every kid is now using social media.
Well, I probably wouldn't allow. Well, it depends on the age. When you say kid, my son just turned 13 yesterday. He still does not have a social media account. So I think that parents need to be very, 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 very careful, because there is so much that children can be exposed to. We've talked about radical content. That's one thing. There's also pornographic content, and there's all sorts of things online. So I don't want to say be afraid, but you need to be very, very careful. And I don't want to preach here, but be a parent. A lot of times parents use cell phones to babysit their children. And so, but the problem is that phone will teach them things that the parent does not want them to be taught. Not that the phone will, but the social media that they're using. Children are impressionable, sensitive. Cyberbullying happens online. Some kids even commit suicide as a result of it. So I think that parents need to take this very seriously. And this is a whole, probably another 10 hours of seminar, but by all means, be as careful as possible. I guess that's all I can say about that.
One more question, Jacob. What about established democracies and new democracies if we try to in different democracies?
I think that the internet froze for a second for me. Could you repeat that question?
What about media polarization in developed democracies, in established democracies, and in new democracies where citizens are not used to see so many information, to classify the information, and so on?
Well,
do you think that new democracy? Georgia have more problems. Georgian audience is mostly asking about Georgia. Do you think that Georgian citizens, let's say, for example, Georgian citizens or citizens from other newly established democracies have more problems connected to social media than, let's say, in the United States?
From where I sit, no. I mean, just from what's happened in the United States recently with the Capitol Hill riot, and that was very much, fueled by social media. And to be honest, I don't know if the United States is in a better position as far as polarization goes than Georgia. I've been surprised by how much people are turning away from mainstream media and towards social media for news. I mean, even, in the United States. So there's just such a distrust of one another and of news and questioning, what is the truth? And so I don't want to be pessimistic, but I'm a little bit fearful for the direction that my country and other countries are heading, because, and I can't blame it entirely on social media, but I think social media in some ways has not helped because of its tendency to push people toward the extremes.
Okay, Jacob, once again, thank you for today's presentation, and please join us to our next NVU Democracy Talks that are held every 2 weeks on Wednesdays at 6 p.m. by Tbilisi time via Facebook or YouTube. Thank you to Jacob and to the entire team responsible for today's live stream.